All right. Part 3 of the Prism primer here. I'm Kevin Murphy, aka Smurf. Uh, One of the questions I've been getting a lot since I put up the video on the Aura plan is how do I know when to bring it in? How do I decide when to bring it in? Instead of just bringing in Herald Beatdown, what what is telling me to bring in the Aura sideboard plan? I've been getting this question a lot, and it's kind of it's one that I wanted to cover. If you have anything else, any other questions like this, put them in the comments and let me know, because I've been playing this deck a long time, so I know what I know, but I also don't know what I'm taking for granted necessarily. So the questions I got about this are why I'm doing this one now and not necessarily later down the road when I had it first planned. So yeah, how do we bring when do I bring heralds and when do I bring auras? There's two ways to answer this question. The first is how good is the opponent against heralds? How well do they deal with them? And then how good are they against auras? Because you can look at it from either side of this. Because if they're going to answer the auras really well, then you might want to bring heralds. But if they're bad against heralds, do you still just bring heralds? If they're bad against both, which do you bring? If they're good against both, which do you bring? And primarily, I'm evaluating this on how good are they against heralds. That's the baseline for where I look at the deck. It's a herald aggro deck, and then the auras are supporting it. But both of these things are important to how I sideboard in a matchup, and any hedges I might make going into a certain game. Because these plans are generally mutually exclusive. When you have the red heralds in, the yellow auras are mostly out. Arclight Sentinel is a bit of an exception, but Parable, Merciful Genesis are almost always out when the red heralds are in. Likewise, when the yellow auras are in, the red heralds are out. These groups don't play super well together. When I want to be on a consistent Herald Beatdown plan, I don't want the yellow auras in. They're too slow. When I have the yellow auras in and I want the Vestige engine to be going super smooth and consistent, the red heralds don't play well with that because they're not consistent resources. They're not flexible in terms of go again. They're almost always just going to get sold to like a Genesis if I can, or blocked with, just to buy me time. So these are separate things. So I need to be able to make decisions on which one I'm bringing if they're going to be mutually exclusive. So we need to evaluate what's going on, what our opponent is capable of doing, and looking at the primary ways that they can deal with heralds or can deal with auras. So the issues that you can face when you're playing the Herald Beatdown plan is high popper count. They can start blocking you super efficiently, always trading 2 for 1. Guardian in particular, Victor in particular, is the one that comes to mind here. He's going to be on 45 poppers, way more than you have heralds. Warriors and Guardian can also have a huge amount of armor that makes it hard to take cards out of their hand, even when you don't have something that can be popped, or they don't have a popper. This can make it difficult for you to even trade up, for you to get any damage in. So this can also make it hard for for the Herald Beatdown plan to really work. If it's going to take you 4 or 5 turns to get through all their armor, and they're hitting you the whole time, and you've held 4 cards and blocked with nothing, you're going to have a problem. The other is just D-React count. You start playing Wraths, you start only getting to send 1 Herald a turn because of it. D-Reacts start blowing you out. All your breakpoints start getting covered, which means their armor lasts longer. This is also a common way that people will tech to deal with heralds. So you need to understand how many of each of these things your opponent is going to have. Now, the other side of that is how do they deal with auras? How well do they deal with auras? Spectra in particular. That keyword is pretty nasty. On-demand action points is the biggest way that they're going to do this. This is Scab Skins. This is Dash IO off the top, Achilles item off the top and crank it for an action point. This is Achilles Accelerator for an on-demand action point. These are the nastiest ways for them to just kind of get around what we're doing and deal with Spectre as efficiently as they want to, rather than us deciding the terms. The other way is just a fast clock. If they just kill us before we can get set up, then auras aren't going to do anything for us. they can just ignore them. I've had a lot of games where it gets down to I'm at 2 life, but I have 2 auras on the board, but Victor's still just going to send Rouse into Chokeslam at me off a Tunic because it's 15 damage. If he just kills me, it doesn't matter that I have Genesis Merciful out. So Fast Clock is another way they get around it. And then lots of Go Again just lets them be flexible on where they're going to put it. If they can go 3 wide, hitting you for 11, and then Kadachi your Spectral Aura, you don't get much out of your Spectral Aura. So then we don't really want to be playing them like that. It's just not efficient. And we're going to take a ton of damage to play it out, especially the 4-cost ones. So it doesn't really work. The Go Again and the Fast Clock will often line up together because that's just generally how you're presenting a lot of damage is lots of Go Again. But these are the things that can make playing auras less efficient and just not as winning of lines. So with that, we can kind of put heroes on a chart. This is rough. This is not where, if I was going to give them numerical values, where I'd put all the heroes. But we need to be able to say if they're good against auras or bad against auras, and then the same for heralds. So the ones that are good against both are the brutes, as you saw from the cards that I listed, Scabskins and Blood Rush, giving them very good clocks, as well as Scabskins giving them action points. Dash IE had a pretty good clock. High Octane definitely helped us in the matchup. She's not quite as good against Spectral Auras as she used to be, but she's still very good. Shooting at Spectral Aura with a Plasma Pistol is still very efficient for her. She can't get around it as easily without High Octane. But Achilles Accelerator still exists, so the matchup is hard. She's kind of good against both. And her clock is still pretty good. If she ever resolves a max V, that's a problem. But she can also pop with max V. She can run seven power poppers relatively easily. The brutes obviously have great clocks. They all have a bunch of Go Again in Wild Rides and just Scabskins existing and Blood Rush with claws. So their clocks are very good. Their popper count is high, even though they're not all. They're a lot of 6 poppers, so you can try to get around it with Triumph, but it's difficult. These are just not strong matchups for us overall because they are good against both. So then looking at the decks that are bad against auras, they don't have access to action points. It's inefficient for them to clear auras. But these decks are pretty good against heralds. The Guardians have lots of poppers. Florian's got a decent number of poppers. They all have a decent armor suite for us, Kasai in particular. But these are all much more manageable matchups because of how bad they are against Spectra, and we can leverage a lot of value there. Moving down, the decks that are bad against heralds. These are your aggro decks, the decks that don't want to block or don't block well. So Syndra, no armor that she wants to block with. It may be 1 point, and we're okay with that. We will eat that up all day. Fi gets a little bit more armor, but a little less clock, I think. His headpieces are worse than Syndra's. Dio doesn't block super well. If you catch her with 2 items in hand, she's in a rough spot. Slippy's just going to try and aggro you. These are aggro races, and Slippy also doesn't have a ton of good armor. Dio's got decent armor. Adaptive plating is pretty good. The gear shift in the leg slot is also nice. It's a nice 1-point upgrade from Achilles Accelerator if they want to run that. But they also don't run poppers as well as Dash IE does. So we get to work a little bit more in this Mechanologist matchup. It's probably the worst matchup of the 4 in this block that I've put here, but I'm still very okay with it, and I'm still happy to run Heralds against it. And I don't feel like I have to hedge like I do against Dash IE sometimes, where it might be Slab Dash, and I have to potentially hedge and bring some auras in, which still can get weird because she can just run Achilles Accelerator. So what does it look like when a deck is bad at dealing with both Heralds and auras? That's Kano. Also the Mirror, special shout out to the Mirror just being, you can't deal with anything the other person is doing, but you can do almost whatever you want into Kano. He can't block. He doesn't have armor to block heralds. He doesn't have D-reacts to block heralds, and he doesn't have a way to deal with spectral auras if you can get them established. It's not necessarily easy to get them established, but yeah, that's Kano. This matchup is rough for him. Now, these are all rough estimates of where I'd put these heroes. Dash IE is probably closer to on this line for good or bad against Heralds than up like in this corner where the Brutes are. Like the Brutes are solidly up here. Like the Guardians are up here. And then like Florian's probably right about here. And then Kasai's probably about here, honestly. Kano's down here. Yeah, Kano's off the screen. But these are rough estimates, and this is something you can evaluate, and you can look at how taking kind of those 3 points on each side of it, and you can look at how well they do that, because like you can move Bravo and Victor over to the left a little bit if you bring time skippers or time snaps or something like that. But that's something you have to figure out through playtesting, and you have to also figure out in the game what they have for you, what tech they've brought, and you need to figure, and then you need to adapt your game plan to that. But as like going back to the aura plan before, it depends. Like that's the golden rule for the deck is it depends. So with where we're putting these heroes, what am I taking against them? Because am I going to take auras against the decks that are bad against auras? Am I going to take heralds against the decks that are bad against heralds? Currently, the way I'm doing this is if a deck is bad against heralds, I take herald aggro. That's where I'm at. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with all those game plans into those decks. I have a good idea going in of what I want to like use Halo for, what my play patterns are going to look like, and how I want to adjust if things get weird. So like round 1 of PT Amsterdam, I sit down across from a Dash IE, and I side Herald aggro, and they flip up a Tunic, and I'm like, oh no, this is Slapdash. This is a problem for me. But so I like play out the game kind of conservatively. I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm trying to get information on how far onto one side or the other they are, and I get a couple heralds to hit, so I get some figments out, and I don't flip them immediately because I can't afford to. And by like turn 6 or 7, I realized I hadn't seen a popper, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to take a gamble and like set the next Herald of Erudition I find and wait for an Angelic Wrath and go for a blowout. But like I'd seen like 9 assumed D reacts or something like that. But like I went Heralds, and I had to hedge and adapt. But that's something that I made a choice based on what I understood about Dash IE, assuming it was somewhat aggressive, to try and like assuming it was like Rainbow T-Bone to get Zen at Amsterdam. But I made a choice, made a hedge, and yeah, this is where I'm at. I kind of default to Heralds. So if they're good against Heralds, I bring auras. This is the way it lines up for me. I'm basing this around, this is a Herald aggro deck that can switch into an aura support plan. And it has to switch a lot of cards. It switches probably about somewhere between 9 to 10 to 11 cards get switched for this plan. It doesn't have tomes in where it was like a full 12 card switch that happened. But this is how I'm making the choice, is I'm basing it as a Herald aggro deck that when something's good against Heralds, I switch into the other plan. The asterisk on that is if you're in this box, you're praying, because these matchups are hard. All the brute matchups are hard. But yeah. So then the question becomes, some of those were easy. What about the decks that are like kind of in the middle, that like are okay against Heralds, they're okay against auras, it gets weird? These are the ones where I'm really getting the questions about it. And I hope I've given some tools to evaluate them, and you can make decisions, because at the end of the day, you're the one sitting down to play the game. You have to be comfortable with the game plan, and it's one that you might have to tailor yourself a little bit. So here, currently, some of the ones I've gotten questions about, here's what I'm doing on them. So new Azuri, the Earth Heroes, some of the Warriors, and then Vincent. Along with them are the 2 Arachnes. These are some of the heroes I've gotten questions on. What are the plans that I use? So currently on the left, these are all Aura game plans for me. New and Azuri don't have great clocks. They can kind of get you if they're if they have a weird draw and they end up being super fast, they can get you. I think you can probably play Herald aggro into New. I'm pretty sure. I've seen it happen and do fine. Azuri, I think it's safe. It's just safer to go auras. Their clock is it's very easy to deal with their disruption when you're playing auras. You can kind of just play around it, empty your hand in response, empty your arsenal in response, and they have less access to go again than New even does. New gets go again about 5 times in a game. I think looking for scraps are all out of their deck primarily as well, which is a benefit to us. That's something I actually should go check. But they haven't been as common as they used to be, I think. At least I don't remember seeing them as much. I could be wrong about that. I apologize if I am. I'm going to go check after this. But they're both fairly slow, and I'm very comfortable running auras into both of them. I'm very comfortable with the play patterns, so that's where I tend to lean. Florian, I think auras is the way to go. Heralds, you're just kind of putting it up to him a bit too much for my taste. Auras, I feel like I have more agency in the matchup, even if he starts bringing a little bit more hate. I just don't want to give him the agency that you can often end up giving him if you bring Herald. Verdance. One more note for Florian as well is, especially in the long games, he doesn't have a weapon that can kill angels. And his attacks are weird to send at angels, especially if he's going to put a rune chant with him. That's another interaction, another note that I want to give for the Florian matchup. If he makes a rune chant and then sends an attack at an angel, sack the angel to the rune chant, because then go again or nothing else like that matters. He can't do anything about it. It also means he can't decompose if you do that. So if he's trying to guarantee get rid of an angel and he wants to send something and decompose, if he wants to Summer's Fall and decompose to bottom an aura from your field and he sends it at an angel, he can't send it with a rune chant because you sack the angel to the rune chant and the decompose doesn't occur. In that vein, Verdance doesn't have a weapon that can kill auras. Take advantage of this. If she has to send a Plow Under at a Spectra, dope. If she has to send a Felling at a Spectra, awesome. Decompose triggers do not occur when you attack Spectra. It never resolves as attacking. Decomposes are when this attacks triggers. So, I'm very happy to abuse Spectra there. That being said, you can probably still go Herald aggro into her just because her popper count isn't super high. I've seen some at like the 9 or 10 point. But there's also decent odds that you can just protect an angel on board. And you can then go like Angel, Herald, Herald potentially. Both of these, or all 4 of these decks so far, are great candidates for Library as well. Library's real rough for any of them, just simply because they don't have the tools to keep up at that point. Most decks don't, obviously, but that's another reason I like taking auras and these longer games is Library just kind of wins you the game sometimes. Library might be the next video I do. I'll see, because I do want to talk about Library a lot. Dory, I like going auras. I don't love Herald's aggro. I think both plans are very swingy. They just have different kinds of swings. Because you can get very easily blown out by a Jagged Edge if you're on Herald Beatdown, where it's like your angels just suddenly get deleted in a way that like it can snowball really hard, where it's like suddenly the first one is hitting and now you have to block the second. But I don't like the volatility of that when I can just drop an ALS, which you probably still play the Arclight Sentinel if you're in a Herald Beatdown plan. But it's just way more reliable to play an Arclight Sentinel in Herald Beatdown. And then, yes, they can hit angels, but they have to be careful about doing it. They don't kill it on if there's no counters or if they don't front pump it. I prefer the interactions of the Aura game plan. in that matchup. Vincent. This is a match, I think this is the single matchup I've gotten the most questions about. It is an extremely difficult matchup, and part of that is because you have to know how Vincent works. You have to understand how many rune chants she's working with this turn, how many rune chants she's going to be working with next turn, based on what she's doing, what her capabilities are for any reactions, whether that's Cull or Succumb. Cull especially actually did make this matchup significantly harder, in my opinion. How aggressive they are, which equipment suite they've brought. Are they looking to be... Are they a pummel Vincent? Because they could be a pummel Vincent, and then things also get weird. I think so. I'm bringing auras in this matchup, and it's primarily because I think heralds are unplayable into a proficient Vincent. You just shouldn't ever deal damage to a Vincent. And it was interesting because I played a couple games against Mara, Prism into Vincent, reasonably soon after Rosetta came out. It would have been about a month, I think, or a couple weeks. We played a couple games at PQs for PQ London season. And I got rolled because I took Herald Aggro in because that's what I took pre-Rosetta. And I couldn't get anything through. I just couldn't get a Herald through because it's... Before Rosetta, you could attack their... they were so light on attack actions that they could play from Banish because they just couldn't play that many. Their deck couldn't make enough rune chants to play that many. So you could actually like pressure that resource where if you could just say, you can't pop this. You deal no damage to me if you pop this. So you would just get like 18 damage through or something like that, just because they couldn't afford to pop. And now they can with Rosetta because the whole deck changed. It got way more consistent at generating rune chants, so they can run more of the rune gates, which are generally poppers. They also got Haunting Rendition, which is a great react. They're on the reduces now. What's the other one? They were on sinks as well, but I think some of those have swapped to shelters. So they have a solid number of 4 blocks as well as reactions. And then they have a great fridge. Purgatory is insane in the matchup, and Carapace is what they at least should have been on before. I'm pretty sure they should still be on Carapace. But it's a very effective chess piece into us just because Temper 2 is really good. So I started bringing auras. And I saw people starting to, like, doing weird hedges where they're like, oh, it's Illusionist, it's going to be a long game, they're going to try and fatigue me, and they'd bring in Tunic and have, like, no armor, and all their D-reacts would be out, and they're all 2 blocks. And I started playing this aura game plan into them where I just, like, I just played a grind game against them. And I was, like, pseudo-fatiguing them. And it's like, against most Vertices, I would stabilize at, like, 13 to 15 life playing auras. And then they would present a kind of middling turn after I'd established an aura, and they ignored it. And then I pivot and kill them when I'm at, like, 5 after I took their turn. And so the aura plan can definitely work because you're not just attack. I'm going to do a whole video on this matchup, but this is the quick version. The aura plan is not just... You're attacking 2 things, which is their action points and their rune chant generation. Because rune chants were changed, at least roughly pretty soon after I started playing, I think. Rune chants were changed to trigger even when you attack Spectra. Now, this does mean rune chants go over Spectra and can hit angels and stuff like that, so you have to be a little bit careful there. But it also means if they want to clear Spectra, they have to burn rune chants, most likely. This gives you a way to mess with their engine in a way that inexperienced Vincent players won't know how to handle. Now, that's starting to change. I'm seeing more of them start to get it right. The matchup is extremely hard and extremely technical, and it requires probably the most matchup knowledge of any of them on the board or any of them on the slide right now, as well as even just like, I think of any aura plan, it's the most technical, and it's probably the hardest matchup to play correctly as Prism at the moment. I'm trying to think of There was another one that I thought might be difficult, but I think it's still Vincent is the hardest matchup to play because it requires you to have such like deep knowledge of how Vincent works and all their resource management, and knowing when to pivot is extremely difficult. So it's I'm gonna do a whole video on that matchup when I find a good way to talk about everything in it. Hopefully with some gameplay, but we'll see. So yeah, these are kind of the ones that I have questions about that I bring auras into. I will touch on Enigma quickly after I get to these two. Against the Arachnes, I bring Herald aggro. They're very aggressive decks. They can have solidly fast clocks and a decent amount of go again, enough that it can be hard to like mess with what they're doing. Slippy obviously has a solid amount of go again. His first stealth attack always has go again. And then Marionette, if he can get you marked, or if they can get you marked, excuse me, can be very difficult to get value out of Spectra against them. This is these are just Herald aggro matchups, and I bring in like Calming Gesture as a Spectral Shield generator to deal with Flick Knives, and they shouldn't be too much of a problem. They don't like blocking. They don't have good armor suites. This makes it you will break through. They have to give you cards to stop Heralds, and they don't run a lot of poppers. The most I've seen a Marionette run, I think, is 8, and that was an outlier. Most are on 3 or less. Slippy might be on a little bit more. It depends on the build. I haven't seen a ton, but Slippies don't run a ton of poppers from my understanding. So you should be able to kind of work through both of these. You have to be willing to take a little bit of damage to do it. Their clocks are pretty quick, but your Herald numbers are also pretty significant. And when they don't have armor they want to block with, that's in your favor. So, yeah, those are the ones. Those are the questions that I most commonly get. Enigma. I'll probably end up doing a video on this matchup as well. I want more reps in the matchup. I have an idea of how it works, and I run a weird hedge, which is I bring both the auras and the red heralds. Now, they don't play well together, but I don't think either. I think it's still the best plan into Enigma, because this is an it depends situation. I need to break their first board. I need to be able to break their board, and the break points of red heralds are so important for that. Then the auras are the best way for me to take the board. Because if Enigma doesn't have a board, she's not great at clearing Spectra. When she has a board, she's fantastic at it. It's super efficient. Make a Spectral Shield, aura's gone. Easy. When she doesn't have a board, it's very difficult. It's more difficult, significantly more difficult, for Enigma to clear Spectra. I've had a number of Enigmas send Phantasmaclasms at Spectral Auras just to clear them because they don't have another option. But that's because I don't give them an option, because I'm keeping their board in check with red heralds and aggro. So it's a weird hedge. The sideboard, I think, is going to be set up in the link in the description. If it's not, I will check and set that up, because it's weird. It's a weird one, and it depends case. But that's something that I learned by trying it. That's something I learned through games. The Vincent one is something I learned through playing the games. I took plans into each of the heroes, and they didn't work. Like into Enigma, I took Herald aggro, and I just got blocked out completely, and eventually they pivoted into a Mirror Guy that I could never clear, or a Rage Spectre that I could never clear. I took auras, and just pure auras, and then I didn't have enough heralds to push through a board that they would make. Vincent, I took heralds into the new post-Rosetta builds, and I got rolled, and I took auras into it, and it was better. And then I worked on it more, and it was better. And then I worked on it more, and I'm like, okay, I can play this matchup again. It's hard, but I can play it. You're going to have to just pick one, try it, and see what happens. And you can figure out pretty quickly how well heroes deal with the different plans. Because, like, the games that I win against Enigma, I just have a Genesis and a Merciful on the board that they never get to deal with, and they always have a Spectral Shield pinging them for 1 Arcane, and half the time I've gotten their gloves by then. I've gotten them to break their gloves to make a Spectral Shield to stop a Herald from hitting or something. And if I get to do that, then like Merciful Genesis is just, it's game winning because they don't have a board if I've established those. But that's a hedge that I made based on experience playing the matchup and understanding the matchup. So yeah, I hope I've given some tools for evaluating how decks are going to respond to each game plan, how they would deal with each game plan, but also what I do for some of the weird middle ground heroes. Also note Dash IE I still run Herald Aggro into, even though I put them up in the good against both category. But this is a case of it depends, and you might need to adjust these things based on the builds that you see. If it's a pure aggro Florian that has snaps and tunic and is running CMH with swarming gloom veils and scar for scars, nimblisms and nimble strikes, you might need to go Herald aggro. But you may not know that until it's too late, kind of. But that's something that you can see in Swiss rounds, and then in top 8 you know to sideboard differently. These are it depends things. And some of them are pretty reliable, pretty consistent, but some of these are also up to you. New is a matchup where you can take either. They're generally low on poppers. They might be a little bit higher at the moment than before, just on 2-for-6s. But you can run Herald Aggro into New pretty comfortably. I just prefer running auras into them because the game plan is more my style. It's more enjoyable, and I understand it very well. It feels more powerful to me. The things it's doing feel like it has a better chance of winning because it is more disruptive, because it's harder for her to deal with, because it takes her off her game plan kind of more reliably, in my opinion. But I don't have an issue if you run Herald Aggro and New. She has a hard time dealing with that as well. Now, they've started cutting Count Your Blessings, so it may be harder than it was before, because they don't have 6 extra no blocks in their deck. But that's something to test out and work on. So, yeah. Hope this was helpful. If there are any other questions on this, please let me know. I'm gonna see if I can do one more video before this weekend, one more piece before this weekend, probably on library. I've got some good stuff on that, I think. And then I'll see if I can do a Vincent video next weekend. I think I can get some games recorded coming up, because I want to have gameplay with that one. That matchup is one that I really want to have gameplay for. So yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you for watching. Peace.